Batman Arkham Asylum is one of those games that just sticks in your mind. I remember playing this when it came out. I was 12 years old at the time, and it obviously struck a chord with me. Its unique combat for the time, interesting traversal, special boss designs, and just general story was incredibly appealing. Now, playing it all these years later, it's like I just finished it yesterday. I can't say this for a lot of games, but I remembered so much of Arkham Asylum. Most games these days I can put 40 hours into and completely forget them a week later, but this game has stayed fresh. It also holds up surprisingly well years later. It's really fun, has a distinct visual style, and represents a drastic change for video gaming in general. Arkham Asylum had a massive impact on the games that came after it, and would represent a huge turn in action-adventure games. It would also mark the beginning of a series of games in the Batman Arkham verse. This series would be long-running and would span multiple entries as well as multiple mediums. So I'd like to see if this game still holds up all these years later. Today, we're going to be taking a look at this classic. I'll dive deep into Arkham Asylum. We'll be talking about its story, gameplay, mechanics, and everything in between. If you enjoy the video and want to support the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really helps my channel out so that I can keep making these videos in the future. You can also support me over on Patreon, where I upload longer versions of my full retrospectives, rambling text post updates, and provide early access to my videos. Spoilers for Batman Arkham Asylum. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Batman Arkham Asylum. Batman Arkham Asylum was first announced in 2008. It was developed by Rocksteady Studios. Rocksteady had the backing of Eidos and Warner Brothers. Eidos had obtained the rights to make a Batman game and approved of Rocksteady's prototype. The game officially began production in September 2007. Rocksteady had only made one game by this point, Urban Chaos Riot Response, for the PlayStation 2. Urban Chaos was a first-person shooter and was received decently at the time. It's become somewhat of a cult classic now, though, with people going back to enjoy it. Paul Dini was chosen to write Arkham Asylum. Dini has written for tons of TV shows like Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, and the new Batman Adventures. He has also written for tons of comics, action comics, detective comics, and tons of Batman stories specifically. Dini met with Rocksteady, and the ideas that they both had aligned, so they decided to work together on the project. Dini's biggest interest in the project was that it would be an original story. Most video games that adapted comics at the time were exactly that, adaptations. So Dini was excited to be able to make something new in the medium. The game took a ton of influence from Frank Miller and Neil Adams. Specifically, the visual style took from Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum: A Serious House on Serious Earth. The developers took inspiration from BioShock for the game's atmosphere and narrative. The team also said that they used elements from Zelda and Metroid games to make the gadgets in Arkham Asylum. The team very much wanted to keep the core idea of Batman in the game. They wanted to take the classic and iconic elements of the character and bump them up, while removing ones that didn't fit. The game did take from certain depictions of Batman and even references the animated series, but it was meant to be a completely original version of him. The team also wanted to relegate the first game to Arkham Asylum, as it made for a tighter narrative. Because the story took place in one environment, Batman couldn't get distance from his enemies, which added to the tension. The game originally had a larger scope of characters, but the team had to size this down once they realized it didn't fit with the story. Mr. Freeze was originally included in Arkham Asylum, but they realized that his motivations did not align with Joker's. The team spent a lot of time on the design of the environments for Arkham. They wanted to include the comic book elements that made the Batman universe iconic, while also including the Gothic architecture of the series. Arkham itself was expanded to become an entire island to make the scope of the game larger and fit the narrative. The island took some inspiration from the real-life Alcatraz, a prison island in California. The design for Batman in particular was mostly taken from Jim Lee's depiction of him in the comics, an incredibly muscular and strong version that could reasonably fight competently. The Joker was modeled closer to the Killing Joke version of this character, and the team had to make sure to avoid from taking from any Batman films because they didn't have the rights to those. Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and Arlene Sorkin all worked together on Batman the Animated Series. They all came back to reprise their roles, with Conroy playing Batman, Hamill playing the Joker, and Sorkin playing Harley Quinn. Batman Arkham Asylum was released on August 25th, 2009 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Before we get into the video, I'd just like to talk about some brief notes. Firstly, I played the remastered version of Arkham Asylum that was released as part of a collection. This was called Return to Arkham, and was a remaster of both Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City, that was released in 2016. This was really just a visual remaster and doesn't change very much about the game in general. The second note is that I did do some research on Batman as a character and his universe before making this video. I just want to say that I'm not the most knowledgeable on Batman. I was a huge DC Comics fan back when I actually read comics pretty often, but Batman wasn't really my go-to. I was always more of a Green Lantern head. I have obviously read Batman and know the basics of his story, and have read some of the more popular arcs, but I decided to reread some of the iconic ones for this video so that I could have a good baseline for Batman's character in general. The books I read were Batman The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore, Batman The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb, Batman Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth, and Batman Year One, again by Frank Miller. I had read most of these before, but it was a good refresher on the character, atmosphere, and the world of Batman. It was also a good representation of the multiple interpretations of the character over the years, and the influences that were used to make this game. Arkham Asylum begins with Batman bringing the Joker to Arkham Asylum. We start this story with an already established Batman, his world, and his villains. These characters already have a history. Batman has been stopping them for years at this point. If you're not versed in the Batman lore, Arkham is a house for the criminally insane. It is home to all sorts of criminals and terrible people, but most importantly, it's the holding place for most of Batman's most infamous foes. This is generally where these madmen and women go when Batman inevitably catches them. It began as more of a mansion and has evolved into a prison/mega complex. It has had many different iterations over the years, but this version that we see is very much an isolated island Alcatraz environment. The Joker was caught at Gotham City Hall. Meanwhile, a fire broke out at Blackgate Prison, so a lot of Joker's goons were sent to Arkham. Joker is strapped into a stretcher, and we have to use Batman to follow the guards and Joker as he's wheeled away, taunting security and Batman the whole time. This little sequence serves as our opening credits, but it also does a couple of other things. First, it gives us an introduction to some of the other prisoners, the situation at hand, and the environment that we'll be spending a lot of our game in. We are subconsciously taking in the environment around us, Joker's thugs across some bars, and even a pre-recording of the warden Quincy Sharp talking to new prisoners. This also introduces us to the Joker himself, the main antagonist of the game. We get to see how he works, his antics, and his general demeanor. The sequence doesn't seem like it does a lot at first glance, but the developers don't waste a second of the intro, constantly using every piece of it to give us more information. The lights go out in an elevator and Batman immediately grabs Joker, thinking that it's part of his plan to escape. This is obviously a representation of Batman and Joker's dynamic and how little our hero actually trusts him at this point. The Joker, of course, eventually escapes, though, once he is separated from Batman with the help of Harley Quinn. Then we get our first taste of combat, having to fight off some of Joker's thugs. With that, we should probably take some time to talk about the combat system in Batman Arkham Asylum. This game has two different types of altercations, hand-to-hand combat and stealth. Hand-to-hand combat is pretty simple. We can attack enemies and counter them when glowing indicators shine above their heads. We can also take them down when they're on the ground. The goal with combat is to keep the flow of the fight going steady. We have to time our attacks accurately and try as hard as we can to not get hit. Now, we can upgrade our hand-to-hand combat, enabling us to take down enemies immediately once hitting a certain combo and add some variations, but the combat is incredibly simple. This works in its favor though, because it's just challenging enough to keep a combo going that we're interested. See, this was one of the highlights of Arkham Asylum when it was released, this new smooth flowing combat system. It was incredibly engaging and unique for its time. The main thing I was worried about with going back to Arkham Asylum was that it wouldn't hold up, but surprisingly it does. It's still incredibly quick and smooth. We feel like we are Batman. We have information that the goons we're fighting do not. We can see one step ahead of them and use that information to defeat them. Not only does it place us in the shoes of the character, but it also just feels good in the hands. It's intuitive, simple to learn, but difficult to master. This combat system would go on to be replicated and become incredibly popular. Most famously, a very similar version of this was used in the PlayStation Spider-Man games. While further games would extrapolate on this system and fine-tune some of the mechanics, Batman Arkham Asylum is the prototype version of it, and it still works great. We also have the stealth to talk about here, which isn't as glowing for me. It's not a bad part of the game, but I never enjoyed it as much as the hand-to-hand combat portions. I should also preface this by saying I'm not really a huge fan of stealth. I always take the loud option whenever I'm put in a situation where I'm given the choice. I just want to put that out there to make clear any prior bias I may have. Stealth sections are mostly required when we're going up against thugs that are armed with guns. These thugs can obviously shoot us, and we don't have much way to defeat them up close, hence why we have to use the shadows. Batman's detective mode works great here, which lets us see through most walls and see the heat signatures of thugs. We can stalk around on the ground and stealth take down enemies from behind, hang them from gargoyles, and even blow them up with some gadgets that we'll get later in the game. The system is pretty fleshed out, and there does seem to be a lot in the way of choice. I just wasn't having as much fun with the game when I was stealthing around as when I was up close battering enemies. It does feel like the stealth tends to slow the game down a bit, but it's understandably necessary considering it's a core feature of Batman as a character and his mythos. Both systems start out incredibly simple and are then progressively upgraded throughout the game. We can get upgrades every time we level up for a variety of different things, making stealth or hand-to-hand combat easier, and even upgrading our health. We will also get a variety of different gadgets that can be used, which can change traversal or combat drastically, but we'll get to those in time. The Joker lets us go after we defeat his goons, and we're allowed to head forward, most likely into a trap. As we head deeper into the facility, we find that Victor Zsasz has taken a guard hostage. This is where the game introduces the glide kick to us, a move that will incapacitate an enemy from a vantage point. Zsasz has been around in the Batman comics since the 90s and is a killer who usually marks his body with tallies of the victims that he's killed. We don't let him get another tally though, and Harley Quinn calls Batman to say that she's taken Quincy Sharp hostage. Quincy Sharp is the warden of Arkham Asylum at current. We escape the area by using the vents nearby, one of the main ways that we'll be able to maneuver around the island. In the next room, we encounter some guards that are barely hanging on for life as they dangle above some Joker's toxin. We can save all of them by enabling the ventilation fans below by using a well-placed batarang. Joker continues to lead us through the facility with some green arrows that he's painted on the floor. Following these, we fall into the trap that we knew was coming. Joker mutated a prisoner into a massive brute of a human. This mini-boss will charge at us, and we have to quick-fire our batarangs while he charges and deftly dodge out of the way before he hits us. We can then deal some damage to him. The fight doesn't last long, though, because the brute dies before we can even take him down. The Joker escapes once again and tells us that Frank Bowles, a security team member, is working with Joker and has captured Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Gordon and Batman's stories are historically linked. Gordon usually provides Batman with on-the-ground assistance and moral counsel. With Gordon, the police are on Batman's side, and the city is on his side. He's an incredibly important character to the world in general. We get a new function here. Batman's detective mode can detect certain things in the air or fingerprints on the wall. This time, we find a trail of alcohol vapor from Frank Bowles, who was drinking alcohol. We can also use this detective mode in combat to see enemies through walls. This becomes incredibly helpful when trying to locate thugs that we're sneaking up behind or even preparing for fights coming ahead. The detective mode also lets us see vents that can be unlocked, doors that we can go through, basically anything in the environment that we can interact with. It's incredibly useful, and one of my only complaints was that I mostly had to have it turned on throughout the course of the entire game, just because it was so useful. This caused me to not really be able to appreciate the aesthetic or the environments because I was always either fighting or looking for clues. Just as we make our way toward the end of this trail, Harley Quinn blows up the cables on the elevator and Batman escapes. We have to weave through this elevator shaft, making our way to the top. One thing I should probably point out here is that Arkham Asylum has a linear story, but a bit of an open world. Its open world is mostly divided into smaller, open areas. Throughout all of these areas are tons and tons of collectibles for us to find. These are placed by the Riddler. We can find these collectibles and solve these riddles to eventually track the Riddler down. We can find Joker's chattering teeth scattered about the environments, Riddler trophies hidden and tucked away in different areas, and even solve riddles from the Riddler himself. The riddles usually require us to scan specific pieces of scenery in the area or even a specific person. These are usually references to characters that are deeper in the Batman mythos, some incredibly obvious ones and some lesser known ones like Maxi Zeus. I really enjoy the collectible system, even now. Some of the challenges aren't that difficult, but some of them can be pretty perplexing. We can make things a little easier by finding a secrets map for each area that reveals the general location of each collectible. I remember even seeking all of these out when I was a kid. When I was younger, I would never really look for every secret in a game. I mostly completed the story and then just moved on. But Arkham Asylum was different, and even now I was easily pulled away from the story to look for new trophies or solutions to riddles I hadn't completed. A lot of these riddles and trophies will not be gatherable until we've collected all of the gadgets in the game. Arkham Asylum very much has a Metroidvania-style layout, the developers even stating that they took inspiration from the Metroid series for the structure of the game. We will often get gadgets that will unlock new secret areas that we couldn't access before. The whole structure works incredibly well, especially with the collectibles. We'll often see a trophy or a secret and know right away whether we have the tools we need without the game telling us. Finding all of Riddler's collectibles will actually reveal his location and allow us to send the police there to apprehend him.
Tell me, how did you work out where I was? Do you hear me? I, Edward Nigma.
When we eventually find Frank Bowles, he's already been killed. He was double-crossed, incredibly foolish for trusting the King Clown himself. One of the Arkham guards unlocks the door nearby, letting us outside. This is where we get access into the wider world that Arkham Asylum has to offer. The island is split up into 3 open sections: Arkham North, West, and East. Each of these sections have other facilities in them that are their own contained sections. The open world feels great and pretty good to run around in. I do think that the next game in the series would do the whole open world thing a little better, but this was the prototype for that. The traversal for the open world is also great. We can glide around with Batman's cape and use our grappling gun to get up to high ledges and zip across the space. Also, aesthetically, the world just looks really good. I love the style that they went with in general. There's this dark, sort of nasty, gritty coloring to the world. It mostly reflects the Batman post-Dark Knight Returns, the rise of the reflective, gloomy, shadows Batman. It feels like a nasty place, one rife with criminals and the insane, one with no rules, no laws, just a free-for-all of Batman-fueled angst. This effect can push the aesthetic in the other direction a little bit, though. In certain spots, the world can look kind of bland. I think in the end, though, that Arkham Asylum certainly has its own style. It looks very unique and distinct. Outside, we find the Batmobile being assaulted. Inside of the Batmobile, we find the explosive gel upgrade. There are multiple uses for this gadget. The first is gaining access to many different secrets that the island holds. We can put the gel on thin walls that can be destroyed, giving us access to their secret passages. The explosive gel can also be used on walls during combat. It's particularly useful when we're in stealth combat. We can blow up walls that enemies are standing by, causing them to be automatically knocked out. We defeat the thugs and start making our way around the island before we find a trail of tobacco left by Commissioner Gordon. We can follow this trail and eventually find out that Joker's thugs have taken the medical facility. Inside the medical facility, we see Harley Quinn hiding behind an electric barrier. We have to find another way inside and save one of the doctors at the facility. We're then tasked with saving more doctors before we proceed downstairs. As we travel down towards the morgue, we see the Scarecrow. Scarecrow is another classic Batman villain. He generally is characterized by his signature toxins that bring out the nightmares of the individuals that breathe them. We see some of his victims, and Batman is quickly affected by the same gas. Eventually, we find Gordon, who's leaned on the wall, dead in the morgue, but we can tell something is wrong because Batman's eyes are red. When we head into the morgue, we find 3 bodies, one of Thomas Wayne, one of Martha Wayne, Bruce Wayne's parents, and finally, Scarecrow himself. We're then transported to a nightmare world, a broken version of the hospital, swimming around in a massive stormland. This is one of Arkham Asylum's greatest strengths, that it tailors the gameplay of each boss, each villain, to the characters that they are portraying. We don't fight every boss in the same way here. They're each different, and they are based on the bosses that we're fighting. Before we talk about this boss fight in particular, which is probably the shining moment of the entire game, to be honest, we have to talk about Batman's villains. Batman is an iconic character, for sure. He generally sits somewhere around number 2 or 3 on the list of the most popular and beloved superheroes. He's easily the most recognizable and iconic in the DC lineup, but Batman is nothing without his cast of villains. When you have a conversation about Batman, you immediately have to talk about the Joker, Harley Quinn, Catwoman, Two-Face, Bane, the Riddler, the Penguin, Scarecrow, Mr. Freeze. The list goes on, and these are just the most recognizable ones. This isn't even mentioning people like Calendar Man, Zsasz, Black Mask, Hush, Mad Hatter, or Hugo Strange. These villains are almost more iconic than Batman himself. He doesn't exist without these people. His universe just isn't as interesting without this cast of characters that he constantly has to pit himself against. Not only are they an interesting part of the mythos and make the story more interesting, but Batman is nothing without his villains as a character as well. Specifically in my refresher readings, one thing about the character popped out at me. One thing that many writers have emphasized through their depictions of the character throughout the years, that he is nothing without his villains. There's also the idea that Batman could be compliant in the creation and activity of these villains in the first place. Basically, it's possible that if Batman didn't exist, his villains wouldn't either. The only reason a lot of them go on is to prove themselves better than him, or to bring him down, or to humiliate him. These characters also exist as a reflection of Batman himself. Now, of course, this is speculation and just my interpretation, but one that's shared by many. But this is how I've always looked at Batman's villains, as a mirror that is shown in his own face. He is just as crazy as the people that he puts away. He's just as troubled and just as damaged, but he just had a different lot in life. If things had gone another way, he'd be the one being put in Arkham. These Scarecrow sections, which are scattered throughout the game, require us to jump across platforms and avoid Scarecrow's gaze. We eventually reach a bat signal, which we can shine on the villain. This specific section doesn't bring any more light to Batman as a character, which will come a little more later, but it does show that clearly the death of his parents still haunts him greatly. Also, I'm not going to go over Batman's origin story at this point. I think we all know that tale. But it clearly is Batman's true motivating reason for becoming a hero in the first place, at least in most representations of the character. This is what showed him crime needed to be dealt with in the first place. Seeing his parents destroyed in one fell swoop for no reason other than pearls was enough to make him go mad with visions of justice. Eventually, we realize what we already thought, which is that Gordon was not dead, but captured by Harley Quinn. We have to sneak around this next room to take the thugs out and rescue Commissioner Gordon. Once that's done, Joker has a surprise for Batman in the middle of the room. Bane is being pumped with something called Titan, the new serum that Joker used on the brute we fought earlier. It's making Bane even more jacked than he already is. He blasts us through the wall, and we have our first true boss fight of the game. This one is probably the most bland of all the fights that we'll encounter. It's really just the same concept as the brute we fought earlier, and ones that we'll fight many times throughout the game. We have to avoid Bane's attacks and place a batarang at the right time to stun him. Once this happens, we attack him to rip one of the tubes from his back and lower his health. We do this a couple times, and Bane goes down. He actually gets trapped under the rubble of the collapsing boiler room as Batman makes his escape. But when Bane gets back up, Batman uses the Batmobile to send Bane into Gotham Bay. Batman then has the chance to save Commissioner Gordon and get him off the island back to safety. We then get to head to the Batcave. Batman installed a small-scale version of his cave on the island before the events of this game. This was obviously just in case situations like this were to occur. Here, we find out that Dr. Young was researching venom, the chemical that Bane uses to give him his strength. Titan was then synthesized from this to make the prisoners more resistant to the procedures that Arkham was putting them through. Our next goal is to head over to Arkham Mansion to try and find Dr. Young's notes on the drug before Joker can get them, because he's clearly planning something big with this new concoction. In the Batcave, we receive the Batclaw. This will allow us to pull down some vent covers and some boxes on ledges, allowing us to reach new areas. We have to use the sewers to get through to Arkham East and eventually gain access to the manor. We end up saving some of the staff once we enter, but we realize that some of them are wearing suicide collars. This complicates our stealth sections just a little bit more. Dr. Young has already made it to the notes by the time that we get there. We then find out that Zsasz has kidnapped her and is going to torture the formula out of her. As we head through the manor, we once again get hit with a scarecrow nightmare. This time, Bruce is forced to relive his parents' death. He's forced to become a child once again, back in that alley, back to the night that changed everything, the night that created this entire situation. Bruce is a complicated character, one that is haunted by the people that he can't save. He's always haunted by his parents' deaths, but in some iterations he's haunted by the death of Jason Todd. He takes his failures heavy, and he doesn't let them go. His past can be one of his faults, but it's also his prime motivator. We once again fight off this massive scarecrow. One of the interesting things about these scarecrow fights is that we are contending with such a large foe. This is also a microcosm of the character of Batman himself. In this duel, we are incredibly small, outmatched by sheer size and power, but yet Batman still comes out on top. This is the epitome of Batman as a hero. He doesn't have insane powers. He can't fly like Superman. He doesn't have super speed like the Flash. He doesn't have a sick-ass magic ring like the Chad Green Lantern. He is a mortal in a world of gods. But despite that, he still manages to come out on top. Through intelligence, patience, planning, and sheer force of will, he manages to bring his foes down, no matter the odds, and these scarecrow fights exemplify that dynamic. Once we find Zsasz, we quickly use our batarang to take him down once again. Dr. Young tells us that Joker now has both formulas, now able to synthesize a powerful new serum. There's a lab inside the botanical gardens that we must get to, but the codes are in a nearby safe. The safe was rigged with explosives though, and Young is killed while Harley taunts Batman with the warden still held captive. When Batman wakes up, he has to contend with Harley Quinn's thugs. We eventually find and free Quincy Sharp in the control room. Here we gain another new gadget, the cryptographic sequencer. This will allow us to hack panels and devices. This is mostly used for getting into new areas or unlocking the electric gates that we've seen so far. We soon pass by Poison Ivy in her cell locked up. She begs Batman to let her go, but he obviously doesn't. It has no effect though, because shortly after this, she is freed by Harley Quinn. Joker begins freeing the rest of the prisoners in the penitentiary. We have to take out Harley's goons once again, and for failing the Joker, she is crossed off his list for the party later tonight. We take Harley out, and she is subdued. We now have to head to the Botanical Gardens. Joker is planning to use his new serum to create an army of those brutes that we saw earlier. We now have to fight some of them, who won't die spontaneously this time. Here we can grab the line launcher, which will allow us to shoot out zip lines and travel horizontally rather than just gliding downwards. This unlocks a whole host of new areas for us to travel to that we couldn't reach previously. Poison Ivy could be the only solution to this problem. She might be able to make a cure for the Titan serum. She refuses, of course, but Batman vows to torture the Arkham plant life, which, because of her connection to nature, would greatly harm Ivy as well. She tells us that we need to head to Killer Croc's lair. There we can find some spores that will help us create a cure. We then realize that Joker has given Ivy the serum, and her plants begin to take over the entire island, changing pathways and areas that we have access to. We eventually head to Arkham Mansion, where we're given directions to Croc's lair. Batman is drugged one final time by Scarecrow and is forced to confront the villain a final time. He gets scared off and heads into Croc's lair. Scarecrow is about to drop his toxins into Gotham's water supply, but is gobbled up by Killer Croc himself. We now have to venture through this lair, grabbing the spores one by one. This is a timely pursuit, and also a dangerous one. We have to walk on wooden platforms, but if we run too fast or shake the platforms too much, Croc will auto-kill us. We can use the line launcher to avoid this. Croc will also jump out of the water and attack us at certain points. Here we have to hit his shock collar with a batarang to knock him into the water. Once we find all the spores, we have to make our way back through the lair and run from the beast. Once we do, the gate is locked, but we explode some detonating gel and Croc goes down, unable to come after Batman. This boss fight was an alright try. It was clearly very stylized specifically to Killer Croc, but it also just overstays its welcome. It takes way longer than it should, and making little mistakes can make the encounter frustrating. I appreciate the effort taken with the fight in general, and the structure and style is good, it just takes a little too long to make it through. Batman heads back to his cave to make the cure for the Titan serum. Once he heads outside, he realizes that the Joker plans to contaminate the water supply with this new creation. We have to quickly stop this by disabling pumping stations. We then head to the Botanical Gardens once again to fight Ivy. She thought that the Titan serum was destroying her plants, but she didn't realize that it was actually making them stronger. She gets in a strange cockpit-like plant and begins to battle us. Here we have to fight Ivy, throwing batarangs at her orb and damaging her when she opens it. The entire time she'll shoot projectiles at us, send her mind-controlled minions at Batman, and shoot tangles of vines up at him to try and subdue him. We have to avoid all of these attacks while still damaging her. Eventually, when she goes down, we have to hit her with the explosive gel twice to fully get rid of her. Here, we begin the end of the game. Joker's party has begun, and Batman is invited. Before we talk about the end of the game, we should really talk about Joker as a character. He's probably the most famous villain, and probably the most talked about and analyzed one. But the most interesting part about Joker and Batman is their relationship. Joker is clearly Batman's arch nemesis. He is the core villain to Batman, to Bruce Wayne, to the larger mythos. He is present in most of the largest stories in the Batman universe. His on-screen portrayals range from iconic to absolute dog shit. He's also, of course, entered epic meme status, and it's kind of hard to have a serious conversation about him at this point, just because of how much he's been propelled into funny boy mode.
We live in a society.
His character is appealing for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is that he's kind of an enigma. Most portrayals, at least modern ones, don't tend to give him an origin story. We don't know exactly where this man came from, why he's doing this, even what he wants. It's in this mystery that lies the appeal of the Joker. Why does this madman want chaos? Joker is also unpredictable. You never know how far he is willing to go to bring down Batman. Will he just kill innocents? Will he target Batman's family? Most famously, in The Killing Joke, the Joker paralyzes Barbara Gordon, Commissioner Gordon's daughter. He also brutally murdered Jason Todd. This all seems to be in the service of chaos. He just wants to watch things fall down. He wants to psychologically break Batman. He doesn't want to kill our hero. He wants to bring the most violent tragedy down upon him. But Batman has his part in this relationship too. In my opinion, this dynamic most exemplifies the relationship between Batman and his villains. The Joker needs Batman. He needs someone to toy with. He needs a purpose in this world. Even in the Dark Knight Returns comic, we see that the Joker was passively biding his time in Arkham Asylum until Batman came back. There was no reason for him to plot, to scheme, to try and destroy the fabric of society without Batman around. But once he is around, he has a reason to live, a reason to exist. But there's a certain element of this that comes from Batman's side as well. He needs the Joker. He needs this consistent force from the other side, constantly challenging him, constantly pushing the limits and giving him a reason to fight. These two are destined to meet every time. They are drawn together by the universe, fated to go at it again and again, fighting an endless battle with no side ever the victor. This dynamic is incredibly strange and has been portrayed in many different ways over the years, but it's easily the most interesting in Batman's world. When Batman arrives at the party, he is greeted by a gang of Joker's goons and Titan brutes. Eventually, Joker shoots the Titan serum at Commissioner Gordon and Batman jumps in front of it. It doesn't change him, though. Joker decides to inject himself with the serum, and we jump ahead to some news copters on the roof. We then see a monstrous version of the Joker, horribly mutated by the serum. He carries Batman up to the roof. It's clear what he wants here. He wants a to-the-death battle, a final showdown between him and Batman, both mutated beyond belief. He wants an epic battle to rival all interactions that they've had thus far. Batman doesn't give this to him, though. He injects himself with the antidote, and we have to fight Joker as Batman fights every villain, with the tools that he has at his disposal. Here, we have to defeat Joker, our final boss of the game. We have to defeat waves of his goons and then pull him down with our Ultra Bat Claw. He'll then get his incredibly long claws stuck in the ground, and we can beat on him. We have to do this 3 times before he goes down for good. Batman sprays explosive gel on his knuckles and punches Joker in the face. We see Batman talking to Commissioner Gordon, who tells him that the effects of the Titan serum are starting to wane on Joker and the others who are now in custody. Batman's work is not done, though, because he then hears that Two-Face is robbing a bank in Gotham, and Batman heads off to do what he does best. We then see a crate of Titan serum floating in the water, and a randomized appearance of a villain grabs it. We can actually see either Bane, Scarecrow, or Killer Croc here. This clearly sets the game up for a sequel and pushes the narrative that just because we won today doesn't mean that the battle is over. This isn't really the end of Arkham Asylum, though. We can of course pursue the Riddler after the game is over. Completing all of the Riddler challenges takes quite a bit of time. Collecting all of the trophies, solving the riddles, finding the Joker teeth, and pursuing the Spirit of Arkham collectibles will take us a bit. Speaking of the Spirit of Arkham, we can find messages from a mysterious person who is the supposed spirit of this dead man. This turns out to be Quincy Sharp, who is actually planning to create an Arkham City, uniting Arkham and Blackgate. Completing all of these will also unlock tons of character profiles and character trophies for us. These 3D models of the different characters in the game are actually really cool. I feel like character trophies are kind of a lost art. They used to appear in all sorts of games and were just a nice little touch to let you inspect the models in the menu. Now they don't appear too often, but looking back it was always a nice touch, something else to collect and take a look at. There are also tons of optional challenges that we can complete after we've finished the story. These are split up into combat and stealth challenges. Both require us to defeat certain amounts of enemies, sometimes in specific ways to earn points. I didn't really spend too much time on the challenges, as I never really found much fun in them. They're not bad for a bit, but I know that people get a lot more obsessed with these than me. We can also play as the Joker here, though, which is pretty fun. He mostly functions the same, but has completely different animations to Batman. He moves differently and uses some signature clown prince style. Batman Arkham Asylum has quite a legacy. It kickstarted a new style, a new idea, that games based around superheroes could branch out and create their own stories. It's known for what it did to games, but it's also a great game in general, and still works today. For a game that's almost 14 years old, it really doesn't show its age. There are a few small things that make it seem dated, but just playing it doesn't make it feel like it came out that long ago. Its interesting presentation and style makes it stand out amongst other cape-shit games. It's got a dark, gritty feeling to the entire environment. All of the characters follow this trend as well. This would be expected in today's environment, but back in 2009, it was something new and interesting. The combat flows like water, fighting off enemies feels so smooth. It both physically feels nice to do it, rewarding and satisfying, but also makes us feel closer to the character that we're actually playing. The story is top-notch as well. It does a great job at introducing us to this version of Batman, this adaptation. But at the same time, it doesn't waste its time on things that we already know. It decides to forego the things that other origin stories would do, and spends its time wisely, giving information we're less likely to assume. It's an origin, but not an origin at the same time. This game is also just a perfect setup for this Arkham universe in general. It perfectly creates a place that it can tell more interesting stories in. The game really gets these characters right. It's clear that the developers did their research. They posed the right questions about Batman and his villains in the fans' minds. It does the cast of villains justice as well, creating specific situations and amounts of time that the game can spend on giving these villains their spotlight. It creates that world that these villains feel like they've spent time in. It feels like Batman knows these people, he has a history with them, and they have a history with him. They have grudges, and so does he. The atmosphere is great as well. Flying around the island, looking for little secrets, it feels like a comic book come to life. The music, environments, sounds, and voices all work together to create this assemblage of elements that just works in every way. Arkham Asylum isn't a perfect game, but it is a great start. It's incredibly memorable, it stands the test of time, and would be just the beginning for what Rocksteady would do with these characters. Batman Arkham Asylum was met with critical acclaim. It still holds a 92% for the Xbox 360 version of the game. Critics thought it was a masterpiece at the time, some outlets even calling it the greatest comic book game of all time. Specifically, the game's world design and details were praised. Critics loved its simplicity and combat. Some pointed out that the boss fights were repetitive and tedious, most calling it the weakest part of the game. Fans loved the game, and Arkham Asylum sold 2 million units in its first 3 weeks on the market. By October 2011, the game had sold 4.3 million copies worldwide. Arkham Asylum was a clear success, and Rocksteady was ready to create another entry in this series. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.